With each passing US election, the Hispanic vote becomes more crucial to clinching the presidency. But does the Republican Party risk alienating that constituency with its increasingly hostile rhetoric and policy? You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Rutansi. Harsh, intolerable, and inexcusable. That's how senior Republicans in Florida described the manner in which Republican presidential hopefuls discussed immigration leading up to the primary there. The state's former governor, Jeb Bush, says the candidates had better tone down their language or risk alienating the Latino vote. It's a sign of the importance now placed on attracting Hispanic voters as the primary season moves into the southwestern states. And even though the community tends to vote Democratic, President Barack Obama will also have some convincing to do this November to overcome growing disillusionment about his policies. Latinos are the fastest growing demographic in the United States, expected to increase to around a third of the population by 2050. Immigration reform is a major issue, and both hardline Republican laws in several states, as well as the record number of deportations under Barack Obama, are unlikely to sit well with voters. But as with other minorities, Latinos are bearing the brunt of the financial crisis. So the number one issue, as for most other American voters, is likely to be the economy. The next Republican nomination vote is in Nevada on Saturday. Rob Reynolds is there.
Latino voters are a large and growing part of the electorate in southwestern states like here in Nevada and around this region. And Republicans would like to have some of their votes. These states vote in the primaries that are coming up next in the Republican contest, and they will be crucial in the fall general election. Now, besides Florida, where the Cuban American population tends generally to vote for the Republicans, Hispanics in the United States overwhelmingly favor Democrats. They went heavily for Barack Obama against his opponent, John McCain, in the 2008 election. But since then, many Hispanics have cooled on Mr. Obama. They are upset with him for not more aggressively pursuing comprehensive immigration reform, and many are also angry at the record number of deportations of undocumented immigrants that have occurred on his watch. Now, polls show that Hispanic voters' main concerns have always been the state of the economy, health care, and education. Immigration has never been the number one concern, but harsh rhetoric by Republican candidates so far this year has alienated a large number of Hispanic voters, and that could spell trouble for the eventual Republican nominee come the general election in November.
So do both parties now risk alienating Latino voters? With me to discuss this in the studio is Israel Ortega, the editor of Libertad.org, a conservative Spanish language website. Brent Wilkes, the executive director of the League of United Latino American Citizens. And from Houston, Texas, Tony Diaz. He's a novelist and leader of the activist group Libro Traficantes. Brent Wilkes, first of all, then, as far as the Republican primaries are concerned, how important is the Latino vote? How great is Latino participation even?
Well, I think in the primaries, Latinos are an important part of the vote, but they certainly will be an even more important part of the general election. And I think what's happening is the Republican candidates risk alienating the Latino community with the really harsh rhetoric that's being used. In fact, this has been probably the worst of the rhetoric that I've seen in a long, long time, especially in a presidential primary process. And, you know, unfortunately, I think some of them have been misinformed that this somehow benefits their candidacies and they can pick up white voters with some of the rhetoric. The truth is, we haven't really seen that borne out by the polls, but unfortunately they've been using this and they're really hurting themselves when they're getting ready for the primary is one thing, but when they get into the general election, this is really going to hurt them.
Israel Ortega, does that mean then that they don't really care too much about the Latino vote right now then?
Well, I think it's too general to say that all Republicans don't care about Latino voters. There's obviously some politicians in the Republican Party who who see the Latino vote as a bigger importance for them, and they're each going to have to figure out as a campaign how they're going to communicate their policies to these to this important constituency. Because I agree with Brett that you know, in the general, we're going to be even more important.
Well, in Florida, certainly, Mitt Romney did win a plurality of the Latino vote. The economy clearly very important, but immigration is an issue there bubbling under. This is what Mitt Romney had to say about immigration in Florida.
Governor Romney, there's one thing I'm confused about. You say you don't want to go and round up people and deport them, but you also say that they would have to go back to their home countries and then apply for citizenship. So if you don't deport them, how do you send them home?
Well, the answer is self-deportation, which is people decide that they can do better by going home because they can't find work here because they don't have legal documentation to allow them to work here. And so we're not going to round people up. The way that we have in this society is to say, look, people who've come here illegally would, under my plan, be given a transition period and the opportunity during that transition period to work here. But when that transition period was over, they would no longer have the documentation to allow them to work in this country.
Israel Ortega, then clearly that was good enough then for the Republican Latino voters of Florida. But is that because they were overlooking that because immigration wasn't that important in Florida?
Well, I think with Florida, you have to realize that the majority of the Hispanic voters are of Cuban and Puerto Rican descent. And so obviously with Cuban and Puerto Rican, the immigration issue is not going to be as important. And so I think that Florida is not really the best example to really test that. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in other states.
You know, what's interesting, though, is the whole country still hearing this rhetoric. Even though Mitt Romney aspires to be president and would be the first Mexican-American president of the United States.
His father was born in Mexico, but was an American.
So,
yeah. Right.
You know, because they really don't understand the nuances of the Latino demographic. What's interesting, too, is Perry, who's out now from my home state here, he understood what the role the DREAM Act played. The DREAM Act's not going to play big in, of course, Florida, but they don't realize that these are the children of the American dream, the extension. These are college kids, and it's such a small amount of actual numbers. And when they bullied these kids, it was just bad. It just wasn't right. I think it goes against American values to...
But again, Brent Wilkes,
all Americans, and I think many Americans were offended.
As far as the Republican primaries are concerned, these are sort of relatively, as far as those Hispanics and Latinos voting in the primaries, these aren't such an issue. They have the same concerns as other conservative voters. They just want to beat Obama, so perhaps these issues are secondary. Is that the case, do you think?
Well, I think I was actually kind of surprised that the Cuban vote went for Romney, given what he's been saying. But I think that you're right. I think that they probably were looking more at the electability issue. They don't think that Gingrich really had it. And so while Gingrich has probably been better, I hate to even use the word better because it's just less bad, let's use that word, less bad than Romney on
less
immigration.
Less draconian, perhaps.
Yeah, less draconian than Romney on immigration issues. He had shown more interest in the Latino vote, and I think it tried harder to get it. And so I was kind of taken aback by the fact that he didn't do so well. But it's true that Cuban voters are a special group because they just by merely touching the U.S. beach, they automatically get legal status. So you know, any other immigrant would love to have that opportunity, but that's not afforded to them. So it's a different situation that they're in, and perhaps immigration wasn't top of mind. I actually think it's just because of the electability issue, and they think that Gingrich would be a tough one to get across the finish line if it turned out that he was the nominee for the Republican Party.
Tony Diaz, the discourse we seem to be hearing there is, as far as the Republicans are concerned, well, the received wisdom was, perhaps until this Mitt Romney victory, say the right things on immigration, perhaps have a Hispanic as a running mate, perhaps the Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio, and then Bob's your uncle. You know, this is a good ticket to grab the Latino vote in November.
I tell you what, even though Obama has broken my heart many a times, the Republicans haven't put together a real sensible plan on how to deal with Latinos because they really don't understand the nuances. And I think even as they put together this plan, I wouldn't pick Marco Rubio because he could probably deliver a primary in Florida, but in Texas, California, he would never win exactly for different reasons about his approach to immigration. Like Israel was saying, you know, Cubans have a different relationship to immigration. Puerto Ricans, my Puerto Rican brothers and sisters, you hear Republicans complain about anchor babies. They created an anchor island by going and making Puerto Rico a commonwealth. They actually made everybody who's born there an American citizen. So it's interesting that they don't really understand what the Constitution, all the laws have really created, and they're just kind of going off of the current rhetoric and not really coming up with something sensible.
But then
all Latinos want is a smart and fair, just immigration laws, and it's not happening. If they talked about that, they would win not just Latinos, but a lot of sensible people.
But Tony Diaz, in the absence then of much hope of comprehensive immigration reform, and indeed of other issues being perhaps more pressing like the economy, when immigration is discussed, is it not so much the policy that's being measured, but the manner in which immigration is being discussed, the words that are being used, the sort of implications that are being pushed?
Well, yes, and of course, I think you're alluding to the fact that, for example, even with Obama, he did vote for a wall along the Texas border, which I think doesn't make sense. He actually came up with ways that has led to more immigrants being deported in this day and age. But he did something very smart during the State of the Union address. He threw some hope to the DREAM Act, and I think by doing that, he's basically blurred all the past rhetoric, and that's very sensible. So you're right. At this stage, they're not really grappling to smart comprehension, but because of what the Republicans did, Obama simply doing that is actually a door for new hope, and I think that's going to win him a big push. Plus, even what's going on in Arizona,
right?
The fact that they would ban Latino studies, that's another.
We'll get on to some of these issues.
A strongly Republican base.
We'll get on to some of these issues in a moment, but just briefly sticking to the Republican Party for the moment, Israel Ortega, why is the discourse so fevered in the Republican Party? It was Ronald Reagan, after all, who gave an amnesty to 3 million Latinos, and not just an amnesty for a path to citizenship, to citizens. He gave them citizenship. Right. This wasn't so crazy before.
Well, I think that what you see is that you see a lot of Republicans who supported the '86 amnesty and thought, like a lot of Americans, that was going to end illegal immigration. We know that didn't happen, and so I think that it's why you see a lot of folks who were supportive of maybe measures where we were going to allow folks who came here illegal to stay here illegally have turned around and said, we need a different policy if we're going to address immigration.
Well, Shahid, you brought up Reagan. Here's an interesting fact about Ronald Reagan. He was the son of an anchor baby. His grandmother came from Ireland. She was a maid, which means that her daughter was an anchor baby. And I think it makes sense that because he had that relationship, which people don't talk about, he was the one that passed the 1986 amnesty for illegal aliens. And I think the Republicans are totally lost about their own history, and I think that's what people are reacting to.
All right. Well, let's look ahead then to November and the presidential election, and that's perhaps where we really will see the significance of the Latino vote. Nearly 22 million Latinos are eligible to vote in the presidential election, the most ever, and up by 2 million since 2008. 68% of Latino registered voters, though, say they support Barack Obama. Just 23% say they will back Republican frontrunner Mitt Romney. Even among those who oppose the president's deportation policy, a majority prefers him to Romney. In 2008, Obama won 67% of the Latino vote, while Republican John McCain took 31%. 45% of Latino registered voters say the Democratic Party is better for them, with only 12% preferring the Republicans. But the share of Democratic Latino voters has declined 10 percentage points from 2008. Israel Ortega, what do the Republicans want from the Latino population, since they're clearly not going to back a Republican candidate in a general election in great numbers?
Well, they have to make a case. And I think the best way to start that conversation with Hispanics is going to have to be talking about the president's record on the economy, unemployment. The fact that Hispanic unemployment rate is double digits, I think, is a good place to start, and really talk about the policies the president put in place that he said were going to create more economic opportunities and how that hasn't resulted. And I think that if you start there, because as polls indicate, as that piece showed in the beginning, the unemployment rate is a top concern for Hispanics.
But in the end, though, practically, is this simply about chipping away at Obama's Latino vote, perhaps, again, playing on that disillusion that much of Obama's base feels about his economic policy? Or is it about getting them to vote Republican, which is probably a more difficult proposition, I would imagine?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Republican Party can't expect to see, a huge, like 75% overwhelming support for the Republican Party overnight. I think that's going to be a slow process, but I think that the Republican Party should be smart and start thinking about ways of expanding its tent and looking at ways of getting more and more people to support their policies, like any political party would do.
Let's look at President Obama's record on some of these issues that are certainly in the back of, at the very least, at the back of the mind of some Latino voters. More than 8 in 10 of the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in the US are of Hispanic origin, it's often said. The Obama administration has deported a record number of this group for 3 successive years. In fiscal year 2011, nearly 397,000 people were deported, the highest annual figure in US history. 97% of those deported are of Latino origin. Mexican immigrants alone make up nearly 3/4 of deportees. 59% of Latinos disapprove of the way the Obama administration is handling deportations. Just 27% approve. Brent Wilkes then, but it would seem, I mean, will that actually have an impact, do you think, then, combined with the disillusionment about a lack of boldness perhaps on the economy and so forth on Barack Obama amongst the Latino population?
Well, it certainly could have if the Republicans had sought out to nominate someone who was actively seeking and engaging the Latino vote and telling a different story when it came to immigration enforcement. Unfortunately, they've pursued the Southern strategy, if you will, towards Latinos, just like they've pursued it with African Americans, and they've been pushing the vote away. So that's going to make it a lot easier for Obama to hold the typical, or perhaps even increase the typical Democratic advantage with Hispanic voters. But certainly the Obama administration erred strategically when it came to immigration reform. They bought into this idea that if you pursue this enforcement-only approach first and deport record numbers of immigrants, that somehow conservatives would say, okay, we're satisfied, now you can go ahead and pass some type of legalization program. And what actually ended up happening was that he just emboldened the conservative voices so that when he came finally to say, okay, let's pass comprehensive reform, they said he could even pull in the same group of Republican senators that they had won back when Bush was president. So, they lost ground with this, let's get tough first, and then people will be more willing
Tony Diaz, why is it so difficult
to pass reform?
Why? Go ahead.
Let me tell you what's going on is that I think what we need to do is inspire the Latino electorate. I haven't heard a lot about that. We need to capture the Latino imagination, because I think what's going on is we felt like we're not part of the table. When race is brought up, we don't feel like we're at the table. I think a couple of things. So, for example, when Obama was senator, he said that there should be a Cesar Chavez holiday. That'd be one way to inspire people who believe in the American dream. But I think really what's going on is they've really got to reach out. And I want to remind people that the Latinos will be a big swing vote. They think of us as not organized. I want to remind people that Dr. Garcia, who founded the GI Forum, started Viva Kennedy clubs throughout the country. And that was one of the big reasons that JFK was elected. I think right now what the Maya were predicting was this big turnaround, not the end of the world, but the beginning of a new democratic process where Latinos have a big seat at the table. And that's right now on the cusp. I think offensive things like our ethnic studies being denied and banned in states like Arizona that to us represent the Republican Party, that's got to be addressed by the Republicans in a different way. Right now, Obama's got to capture our hearts and imaginations with good old-fashioned American values that we children of the American dream believe in. That's what people aren't talking about. That's why it's hard.
But you say we're on the cusp of something, but then, I mean, there has been this spate of recent laws apparently targeting Latinos in particular. We can run through some of those. Arizona's 2010 immigration law, including provisions that require police to check the immigration status of anyone they stop. A federal judge has blocked much of that law from taking effect so far. The Supreme Court will be hearing the case this year. That other Arizona law that Tony just mentioned, banning schools from teaching subjects that are, quote, designed primarily for pupils of a particular ethnic group or advocate ethnic solidarity, end quote. A Mexican American Studies program has been dismantled. Over 80 books apparently banned. Alabama has passed a law more sweeping than Arizona that includes requiring police to detain people if they cannot produce proper documentation when stopped for any reason. And beyond that, Tony Diaz, we have these sort of, every now and then, we have every other day we seem to have a story. Just now we have this story in Connecticut of police officers who have been arrested because they were unfairly targeting Latin Americans and beating them up and so forth. You've also got the redistricting issues in Texas and everywhere else, apparently to try and lessen the power of the Latino vote, voter ID rules, Spanish ballots are being, no Spanish ballots. I mean, you really think this is going the right way?
Not at all. And I think there were forces in the Republican Party that saw the successes of these rules intended to make humans illegal as a base for power, because it started in Arizona and has spread. Now they're making thoughts illegal, which is what this banning, the prohibition of ethnic studies this stands for. And I think that that's cut the grain of American values across the board. And what's being galvanized now is, you know, I'm an anchor baby, so I'm a citizen. So I can't be deported. I also have a Master of Fine Arts degree, so you cannot argue me. What happens now is when you've got American values at stake, the books being banned in Arizona are in English. The children at stake are citizens. They've gone too far, and I think now, if we let that rhetoric exist, how the anti-immigrant laws spread from that same base in Arizona would spread. But what's happening is Mexican Americans, Latinos are galvanizing, and we've got allies who are not Latinos who are jumping on board. And I think they've mistaken that trend, which is anti-immigrant, as a way to get power, but they went too far when they start trying to make ideas illegal, which is against the American way.
Israel Ortega, I mean, it's very difficult not to come to the conclusion here that this isn't all about a fear of undocumented migration, but it's a fear about the growing Hispanic population of the United States in some ways.
I don't know if I buy that necessarily. Look, I think racism and discrimination, unfortunately, are part of our society. I think we've made great strides, obviously, in our country's history, but obviously it's still there. But to say that, in the whole question here right now, I think that's important to put on the table is, we're talking about legal immigration and illegal immigration. I think there's a lot of concern from Americans about illegal immigration, and rightly so, I think, because I think that what we should be doing is talking about increasing legal avenues for people to come here legally to this country. I think the more that we create incentives for people to immigrate here illegally, you're going to see that.
Let's not get bogged down in the actual nitty-gritty of immigration reform, but it's about the manner in which immigration reform is being discussed,
Sure.
but also the manner in which the Hispanic population as a whole in America is perhaps being looked upon by the white population. I mean, do you think that's fair at all, Brent?
Absolutely, it's fair. I mean, that's exactly what's going on here. The reason why folks can't come to work hard in America legally is because we created laws, changed the laws, and made it much harder for them to do that. So it's something that we've done, and it's really reacting to this sense of a changing demographic in the United States. So it's certainly the case that the Latino population is the fastest growing population in the country. It's now the largest minority. We've, attracted the attention of the white population, and to a politician looking to score a cheap pickup of some points, you can start to use this wedge politics and pick up some points with some white voters who are reacting to this.
We often talk about coded language as regards African American, African Americans on the primaries. But are we seeing the same coded language about Hispanics?
I don't even know if we want to call it coded. When you're talking about electrocuting people on a
Right.
fence, I mean that's not exactly coded to me. But I mean, it's ugly. It's disgusting. It's not about a serious discussion of the issue. In fact, if you're really pursuing conservative principles on immigration, then you would want to deregulate this process, allow people to come in illegally, get the government off the backs of hardworking people, and allow them to contribute to the American dream just like others before them have. So it's not a conservative issue either. What it is a race issue. And unfortunately, it's being exploited by certain politicians.
We're running out of time. Israel, I'll take it very quickly. You must respond to that, and then Taylor.
I mean, I'm sorry, I just can't. I mean, I think that it can be part of the discussion, but I don't think racism alone can account for us wanting to have immigration laws that are fair and sensible. I think any sovereign country, including Mexico and countries in Latin America, have immigration laws.
But is this
and we
about
should have
immigration?
them.
Is the question?
Sure, it is about immigration. Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, we have to have immigration laws that are fair, and we enforce them. Right now, our country has not done a very good job of enforcing immigration laws, and that's why we're sending mixed messages to people, and then that's why we continue to have human tragedies at the border.
Tony Diaz, a last thought?
I think what happens is that we as Americans engender laws. It is up to us to reveal laws that are racist. You're not racist if these laws came in the past and you didn't know they were racist. If you maintain them, then you're a racist. Right now, this is a test of democracy. And, a poet just passed away, Czesław Zambrosa from Poland, where a totalitarian regime banned her books. She risked her life. I'm happy that we're in the United States where we can engage in a democratic dialogue to define freedom of speech. I think that's what's really going on. Democracy is hard work. It takes educated people to do it. No simple answers, and that's what's at stake right now. I think people need to let Latinos come in and really participate from all angles in a deep discussion, not just yelling at each other, not just, stirring up emotions, but really coming up with something brilliant so that we can be part of a global economy. That's really what's at stake. America doesn't want to blend in easily to this global economy, and we have to survive.
Tony Diaz, thank you very much. Brent Wilkes.
Thank you.
Israel Ortega, thank you as well. Thank you. And that's it from the Inside Story team here in Washington, D.C. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas to us directly at InsideStory@aljazeera.net.